Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to come from the 49th chapter in the book of Genesis. Herein we read of Jacob issuing prophetic proclamations which would determine the future and destiny of his 12 respective children. Now, 12 sons rather. In the preceding chapter, we witness the blessing of the sons of Joseph. He is the prime minister in Egypt, through whom the entire family, not only Canaan and Egypt, would survive because of his prudence in interpreting the Pharaoh's dream. And he eventually summons his family down there when they come seeking food. And so his father Jacob is there, and he issues the blessing on his two children. And Joseph's two sons are Manasseh and Ephraim, in that order. So Manasseh is the elder, but Joseph blesses Ephraim above Manasseh. Joseph tries to correct his father, but he says that he has done what he has done, and it's actually a consistent pattern that the firstborn are rejected, beginning with Cain and Abel all the way up to Jacob himself, because he was the younger twin brother of Esau, and he had tricked his father with the assistance of his mother to give him the patriarchal blessings. So the opening verse reads, "And Jacob called his sons and said, 'Gather together, so that I declare to you what is to befall you in the last days.'" So he's offering prophecy, and he's summoning them together to tell them what Yahweh has told him about their destiny. This is a species of prophecy, and the 2nd through 27th verse of this chapter is the longest poetic expression in the book of Genesis. Now, this is poetry is a lot of the Bible is arranged in poetry, and Hebrew poetry does not necessarily rhyme, but the parallel exists not in the syllables, but in the thoughts. So we just want to establish that before we read what is in fact poetry. "Gather together and hear, you sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel your father. Jacob was his birth name. This translates as deceiver. So in the Bible, names are more than merely names. They indicate a function to be fulfilled or a character to be embodied by the beholder of their name. And Jacob translates as deceiver, and this we witness with him tricking his brother Esau into surrendering his birthright, and tricking his father Isaac into bestowing upon him the patriarchal blessing. But Israel was the name he had earned when he wrestled with the Almighty, somewhere about in the 35th chapter or thereabouts. So the first six sons of Jacob are the sons of Leah. This is the daughter of his relative Laman near Syria, and the first six. Now, he had loved Leah's younger sister Rachel, but the father Laban had tricked him into marrying Leah after 7 years of labor, and he loved Rachel so much that he was willing to work another 7 years for her. But the first six children he conceived were through Leah rather. "Reuben, you are my firstborn, my power and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of exaltation and the excellency of power." So Reuben was the firstborn child, but as we read, he's not going to be bestowed with the blessings typically allotted to the firstborn, and we're going to learn the reason why. But he is, the beginning of his strength, the excellency of his exaltation, and the excellency of his power, so he was not completely diminished in esteem. "Unstable as the waters, you do not excel, because you went up into your father's bed. Then you defiled it. He went up in my couch." This we read of in the 35th chapter, the 22nd verse, when Reuben entered into and defiled Bilhah, one of Jacob's concubines, who was Rachel's maidservant. And this action, the historical echo of this action is repeated in Absalom, who upon trying to usurp power from his father David, he drove him out of the city of Jerusalem, and he slept with his concubines in full public view. This line of advice, little known fact, was advised upon him by the father of Bathsheba, the woman that David had sinned with and eventually married. But her father was a trusted advisor of David who had switched allegiances to Absalom, and he advised this course of action. Simon and Levi are brothers. Their weapons are implements of violence. So in the 34th chapter, we read that Dinah, one of the daughters of Joseph, was defiled by this prince of the Hivites, and Simon and Levi really take it upon themselves to inflict the vengeance. And what they do is they, as the prince who rapes and defiles Dinah, they say that he wants her for a wife, and as a condition, they're going to have to be circumcised. So they undergo the circumcision rite, and that is when they are physically vulnerable, and that's when they strike. But what's interesting here is Levi was the tribe from whence Moses came, hence when Israel became a nation in the settled promised land, and even during the Exodus, the Levites were to perform the priestly function. Priests we don't typically associate with violence, but Levi, the patriarch of the priestly class, was in fact a man prone to violence, as was Simon. Let my soul not enter their council. Let my esteem not be united to their assembly, because they slew a man in their displeasure, and they lamed an ox in pleasure. So he's issuing not blessings, but curses for the first three born, the three eldest. They had not lived up to their worthy standing as the elder children because of what we earlier described in the 34th chapter, and I guess they lamed an ox in pleasure. They took sadistic delight in torturing an ox, and that is not a befitting characteristic of a worthy person. Cursed be their displeasure, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I divide them in Jacob, and scatter them in Israel. So Simeon, his land and people would eventually be swallowed whole by the territories of Judah, and Levi, because they were the priestly caste, they were not designated to any single location or territory, but when Joshua determined the allotment of the settlements of the promised land, he gave them 48 towns and the surrounding pasture land in which to dwell. So they were not concentrated in one location. They would have been scattered throughout the kingdom of Israel, or it wasn't a kingdom yet, it was a theocracy, and they were evenly distributed throughout the kingdom in order to provide priestly functions throughout the entire land. You, Judah, your brothers praise you. Your hand is on the neck of your enemies. Your father's children bow down before you. So it's not Reuben, but Judah who's going to be given the physical supremacy, the power. This becomes realized and manifest in David, the descendant of Judah, who becomes the model monarch, and his descendants rule from Jerusalem, which is the capital city of the United Monarchy. And every other tribe would have bowed down before David and Solomon, and these were from the tribe of Judah. Judah is a lion's club. From the prey you have gone up, my son. He bowed down. He couched like a lion, and like a lion, who rouses him? So Judah is compared to a lion, which is an animal symbolically representative of might and power and prestige, and his descendant, Yahshua Messiah, is described as the lion of the tribe of Judah in Revelation 5:5. But, he's going to be supreme, as the lion is the most mighty beast, so too will Judah be the most mighty tribe. And the reason that the prophecies pertaining to Judah and Ephraim, Joseph's son, the tribe from whence he came, were because they were to be the supreme tribe. So in the northern kingdom of Israel, after the split of the covenant nation into the northern kingdom of Israel, it would be known as referenced as Ephraim, because they were the predominant of the 12 tribes in Judah and Benjamin, and the Levites. Judah would be the name of the kingdom. The scepter shall not turn aside from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, and to him is the obedience of peoples. So he's destined to rule, he's born to rule, his rule and his authority will not be challenged, and this alludes to the Davidic covenant, where Yahweh promises David a dynasty in perpetuity. So the eternal king is the Yahshua Messiah, who was from the tribe of Judah. And so even though the Davidic dynasty, the descendants thereof, would no longer rule beginning in 586 with the deposing of King Zedekiah, the last of David's line, they would rule eternally forever in the heavens, and his kingdom is not of the earth, as we read of in John 18th chapter. Binding his donkey to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine, he washed his garments in wine, and his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth whiter than milk. So white teeth would have been especially a sign of health in the ancient world, because they didn't have toothpaste or brushes or any modern dental hygienic equipment. So that would have been a symbol of health, because they just didn't have what we take for granted. So a lot of the Egyptian mummies, for instance, they have really bad teeth. Their teeth have decayed through the process of life. But Judah is assured that his descendants will have healthy teeth. Zebulun dwells at the seashore. He is a haven for ships, and his border is unto Zidon. So Zebulun is one of the children, the fifth or sixth born of Leah, and his territory, his destined allocated territory, is by the Mediterranean Sea. The Israelites were a Mediterranean people, but they were not a seafaring people. That skill and acquirement largely belonged to the neighboring nation to the north, Phoenicia, alternately the modern country of Lebanon. They were a seafaring people, but Israel did have some seafaring trade, and they would be primarily concentrated in the tribal territory of Zebulun, which was located some 10 miles from the east of the Mediterranean. Issachar is a strong donkey, lying down between two burdens. And he saw that a resting place was good, and that the land was pleasant, and he inclined his shoulder to bear a burden, and he became a subject to slave labor. So Issachar was one of the three tribes who had settled on the territory east of the Jordan, which was to be the eastern border of the designated promised land. But three of the tribes, Reuben was one of them, and passing en route to during the Exodus generation, they had liked what they saw and had resolved and determined to make it their land, even though it was strictly speaking outside of the designated location of the promised land. And Moses in Numbers 23 says the famous line, "Your sin will find you out," which you often hear at evangelical appeals, but it's in original context. It was directed towards these three tribes to the east of the designated territory where they would settle if they would not assist their fellow brother tribes in conquering the promised land. Then their sin would find them out, and they would be punished accordingly. Dan rightly rules his people, as of the tribes of Israel. Dan is a serpent by the way, an adder by the path, that bites the horse's heels, so that its rider falls backwards. Now Dan was one of the sons of Bilhah, who was Rachel's maidservants, and Dan was the tribe from which Samson sprang. And we can read his story in Judges 13 through 16. I did one on that, the story of Samson, parentheses, Judges 13 through 16, Corey Johnston, prefaced by in the YouTube search engine. But we also read of the treachery of Dan, who is likened to a snake, in the 18th chapter of the book of Judges. So there's that. And here he pauses to give a brief interlude of prayer to Yahweh. So what does Joseph say? I have waited for your salvation, O Yahweh. That is something we are all waiting for in this life. It is our longing and our most exalted expectation and humblest hope to have the gift and treasure of salvation, which is eternal life after the one we now live. So this is always an appropriate prayer, and it's something we must wait for. But the best things in life, in fact, the best thing in life is not in this life, but it is very much worth waiting for. Gad, a raiding band raids him, but he raids its heel. So Gad was one of the sons of Zilpah, who was Leah's maidservant and Joseph's concubine. But he would be a raider, and that was just to be his nature. He was to be a pirate or a looter or something of that sort. Bread from Asher is rich, and he gives delicacies of a king. So Asher was the other son of Zilpah, and his land, the tribal territory allocated to his descendants would be rich in bread and food and agricultural output, we read. Naphtali is a deer let loose. He gives words of elegance. Naphtali was one of the sons of Bilhah, who was Rachel's maidservant, and he would be eloquent with words, so he would be a polished orator and an elegant speaker and a powerful proclaimer. But Naphtali was also the territory in Galilee, and this reminds of the fulfillment of one of Isaiah's prophecies referenced in the book of Matthew, that the lands of Naphtali would be largely blessed from Joshua, who, though from the tribe of Judah and descended therefrom, in fact was raised and grew up in the territory of Naphtali, or Galilee. Joseph is an offshoot of a fruit-bearing tree, an offshoot of a fruit-bearing tree by a fountain. His branches run over a wall. So Joseph, even though he's not the firstborn, he is very much the leader of his sons. It is but through his ability to interpret dreams and respond accordingly that the nation of Israel lives up to its Abrahamic function and promise of being a blessing unto all the nations. So Egypt, Canaan, and all the surrounding territories would have starved to death during this 7-year famine had he not predicted it and implemented a plan of action to counteract the devastating, ruinous effects of the famine. And he was fruitful, so, he was tossed into a ditch by his own brothers because he was their father's favorite. This provoked the envy, wrath, and ire of them, and he went through prison and the captain's guard all the way up to the throne at the right hand of Pharaoh. And the archers have bitterly grieved him, shot at him, and hated him. But his bows remained in strength, and the arms of his hand were made strong by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. From there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. So at this moment in time, at least, he's the shepherd of Israel. He's the one taking the leadership role. The entire nation is there at his gift, and he forgave his brothers who had turned their bows against him. They injured him but did not kill him, and he uses the life that he has been preserved to preserve their life. And this the concern in question with the passing of Jacob, of whom we read of the tail end of this chapter, but we read more specifically the brothers' reasonable concern was that he was going to seek vengeance now that their father was dead, but he assures them that, the 20th verse, and you intended evil against me, but Elohim intended it for good in order to do it to this day to keep a great many people alive. So he could have taken vengeance, but it just wasn't in his nature. That is an act of faithfulness to leave vengeance to Yahweh and to forgo and forsake the personal seeking of vengeance. From the El of your father who helps you, and by El Shaddai who blessed you, with blessings of the heavens above, blessings of the deep that lies beneath, blessings of the breast and of the womb. So this particular son of Joseph had been blessed from all corners and all angles by El Shaddai, that's God Almighty, and he had been blessed and had been a blessing unto others, thus fulfilling the Abrahamic promise to be blessed and to be a blessing unto others. And because he had been divinely blessed, he was able to bless other humans in preserving their life and keeping the food circulation and supply through Egypt and Canaan and the surrounding territory. The blessings of your father has excelled the blessings of my ancestors, up to the limit of the everlasting hills. They are on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of his head, of whom who was separated from his brothers. So as a 17-year-old, he was separated from his brothers who conspired to kill him. It was the intervention of Reuben and Judah, which ultimately persuaded them to sell him into slavery and come back with the expensive coat that his father had given his son as a sign and symbol of his favoritism, dipped in blood, to convince him that he had been killed by wolves. but he had been separated, but he ultimately reconciled himself to the brothers and the family who had separated him from them, and that was a blessing beyond measure and beyond anything calculable. Benjamin is a wolf that tears in the morning. He eats prey, and at night he divides the spoil. Now, this is certainly the Apostle Paul. Before he became known as Paul, he was Saul, and he was of the tribe of Benjamin, and he was a ravening wolf that tore into the early Christian communities, and he was determined to put them on the endangered species list, make them extinct. But then the story of how he turned around is familiar enough to us all that we feel it's not necessary for us to elaborate in any at length on that phenomenon. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what their father spoke to them. And he blessed them, and he blessed each according to his own blessings. So there were 12 sons of Israel, but there were actually 13 tribes, because the two sons of Joseph, Manasseh and Ephraim, who are not mentioned separately, but they are both from Joseph, would have sprang from his loins. And but all these blessings given to each individual patriarch of the tribes would have been according to his own blessing, so it would have been come from divinity. These were not Jacob's words, they were inspired from above, and the blessing, he was administering the blessings which had been given to him to give to them through Yahweh. And he commanded them and said to them, I am to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite. So this is his parting farewell address of sorts. These are his last words of life. He knows his time is short, but he doesn't want to leave the earth without issuing the blessings which he has to bestow upon his sons and the tribes of the nation, which are to spring from Abraham's loins. And Ephraim, the Hittites were one of the native inhabitants of the Promised Land who had settled in the Promised Land. They were originally from Asia Minor or Turkey, but they had a presence in the Promised Land. And Ephraim, the Hittite, would have been the one through whom Abraham purchased the land, which would be not only his tomb, but his sons and his grandsons. In the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which is before Mamre in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with the field of Ephron the Hittite as a possession for a burial site. So we said much of what we could have said, what we should have said before, but just to reiterate, Abraham was the one who had purchased this for the express purpose of his tomb and burial site, not only of him, but of Isaac, and we read that in the next verse. There they buried Abraham and Sarah his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah his wife. And there I buried Leah. Leah was one of his wives. The other one, Rachel, was her sister, and she had died whilst in childbirth to giving birth to Benjamin. So Joseph, the firstborn of her, would have been exalted in the esteem, and the reason he was favored above all the rest is because Rachel was the one he truly loved. He was the apple of his eye. And but we have all the patriarchs listed: Abraham, his wife, Isaac, his wife, and Jacob and his wife, one of them anyway. The field purchased and the cave which is in it from the sons of Heth. And when Jacob ended commanding his sons, he drew his feet up into the bed and breathed his last, and was gathered to his people. So he said his final farewell address. He left with his parting words, and the timing could not have been more appropriate or necessary, because here he is expiring almost immediately after issuing these blessings. And in the 50th chapter, we read of the funerary procession where Joseph leaves. Joseph and some of the other sons leave to complete his father's farewell wish to be buried in the land of his ancestors with his father and his grandfather. And then we read of the death of Joseph at the tail end of the 50th chapter. But that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.